School.
My name is Laura Caldera-Taylor. I'm a trial attorney from Portland, Oregon. And my name is Lynn Uzel, and I'm a scholar in residence at Center for the Constitution at James Madison's Montpelier.
Good afternoon. My name is Vincent Caruso, and along with my teammates Amelia Sacco and David Simon, we'll be answering questions for Unit 6, and with preparation from our teacher, Mr. B.
Hello, congratulations to you. Well, good. So then we'll get right to the question, which is question number 1. And it reads, a recent study of the endurance of constitutions discovered that the mean lifespan is approximately 19 years. The United States Constitution is now more than 225 years old. What factors do you think account for its longevity? What role, if any, has judicial review played in the longevity of the Constitution? What evidence can you offer to support your response? What role, if any, has the separation of powers played in the durability of the Constitution? What evidence can you offer to support your response? We're happy to hear from you.
A constitutional democracy flourishes only if the Constitution reflects democratic values alive in the citizenry. Our Constitution has been able to withstand the test of time because it has retained its legitimacy. The Constitution works to prevent an oppressive government by placing limitations on it and bestowing the majority of the power and authority onto the citizenry, all the while protecting the rights of minorities. This works to reflect and preserve the democratic values and natural rights that Americans hold dear. The people have the power not only to choose who they want to represent their evolving social, economic, and political views and aspirations, but to amend the Constitution itself. This can occur with a 2/3 majority vote in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, or by a constitutional convention called for by 2/3 of the state legislatures. The rule of law is another sustaining feature of our constitutional democracy. In Democracy in America, Alexis de Tocqueville observed that, and I quote, people in America obey the law, not only because it is their work, but because it may be changed if it be harmful.
James Madison wrote that if a Bill of Rights is incorporated into the Constitution, independent tribunals of justice will consider themselves in a peculiar manner the guardians of those rights. They will be an impenetrable bulwark, naturally led to resist every encroachment upon rights. This statement articulates that the purpose of a judiciary branch is to be the guardians of the rights embodied in the Constitution. Also, this articulates that the courts possess the power and authority to interpret the Constitution over time and stop infringements on the rights of the people the Constitution is designed to protect. In Lawrence v. Texas, the Supreme Court reversed the precedent set in Bowers v. Hartwick and stated that intimate sexual consensual conduct was protected as a liberty interest under the Substantive Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. Similarly, in Roe v. Wade, a woman's right to an abortion was recognized as a liberty interest under the same clause. These landmark cases represent a small sample of how judicial review is a key check in preserving the natural rights the Constitution is meant to protect, further aiding in its longevity.
Separation of powers plays a crucial role in the durability of the Constitution. Madison wrote in Federalist Paper 51 that a separation of powers is necessary in preventing a tyranny. Power is distributed among the branches so no one person or group has too much power, and checks are in place in the Constitution to ensure that. For example, Section 2, Clause 2 of Article 2 states a presidential appointment to the Supreme Court must have the consent of the Senate. If the president did not need another branch's approval of his actions, he could act on his own terms and step beyond his authority. President Roosevelt attempted this with the Judicial Procedures Reform Bill of 1937, where he tried to pack the Supreme Court with additional justices to obtain favorable rulings regarding New Deal legislation, where the AAA and the NRA were struck down. This bill failed to pass as it would grant a large amount of power and influence to the president. As James Madison wrote in Federalist Paper 47, the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. Thank you. Take your follow-up questions.
Overstates things a little bit to say that we without separation of powers, there would be tyranny. I mean, certainly there are any number of examples of parliamentary systems in which the executive and legislative power are combined, which can't fairly be described as tyranny. So, I mean, how do you reconcile that with your views?
Well, in addressing parliamentary system's ability to have mingling of powers between the different branches, they also have the ability to the House of Commons, if they have if there is an issue with the Prime Minister's cabinet, they will either bring the issue down to the electorate to have them resolve the issue or vote on it, or the entire cabinet is dissolved.
An example in the American system of a mingling of powers that could lead to a tyranny is the presidential's informal expansion of power with executive orders. We see this today with President Obama's executive order on immigration reform, and many House opposition thinking that he's acting outside of the means of the Constitution and acting tyrannically.
Separation of powers was purposefully instilled in order to limit government. The founding fathers had just escaped a government of monarchy, and there was tyranny. So, in order to prevent this major fear of theirs, they purposefully incorporated this into their Constitution.
There was one thing that really struck me about the way that you talked about the longevity of the Constitution. You gave what I thought are usual answers about the structure of government and protection of rights, but you also talked about the rule of law, which is not found in the Constitution, but rather in the habits of people. And could you talk a little bit more about that? If this is part of what accounts for the longevity of the Constitution, how much is accounted to the habits of the people and how much to the Constitution itself?
Well, this fundamental principle that's instilled also in the citizenry to provide that law is being applied equally to all is evident in the case U.S. v. Nixon, to show that the president can't have executive privilege to withhold evidence in a criminal proceeding.
Do you think that the judicial review that the Supreme Court does has resulted in the Supreme Court amending the Constitution? And if so, do you think that that has put additional powers with the Supreme Court such that it's now uneven in the role that the judicial branch is playing?
I don't believe that with the judicial review, though it was made through Marbury versus Madison, in the early 1990s, when it was first made, though it was not specifically a part of our Constitution, our national Constitution. It's important to remember that it was incorporated into the state constitutions, and it was used, and it was the founding fathers felt also stated in the Federalist Papers that it was necessary, and it was so fundamental that they didn't feel like it was needed to be expressly said into the Constitution.
With that, I wouldn't assert that the Supreme Court is using it as an amendment process, but rather they use judicial review as a tool to interpret the Constitution with the changing times. For example, the Supreme Court utilized this tool of judicial review by reversing the precedent set in Plessy versus Ferguson that separate but equal was equal, and in Brown versus Board of Education, they deemed that that was incorrect, and that separate but equal was inherently unequal.
Through judicial review, it was also used to overturn the Gobitis case in 1941 with the Barnett case, in that it was the right of the people to either give the Pledge of Allegiance or not, and through that it allowed to preserve the First Amendment right to freedom of speech.
Do you think that the amendment process is too difficult? I know that Judge Marshall thought that it was too unwieldy and cumbersome. Do you think that the Constitution would be better if it were more easily amendable?
I don't think it would be better if it was easily amendable. I feel the complexity of the amendment process is necessary to ensure that only the most fundamental rights be preserved and amended to the body of the Constitution, and not let any feeble examples come up.
Along with fundamental rights, also I believe that the amendment system's difficulty prevents the government from attempting to instill new laws that would infringe on the rights of the people that the Constitution is meant to protect.
Would you make any changes if you could? If someone gave you the right of amendment, is there something you think, well, that could improve these a little bit? What would you do?
I believe in order to further perpetuate the fundamental principle of popular sovereignty, I would personally amend the Constitution and take away the Electoral College and make the president's election a direct election, such as the Amendment 17 did with senators, in order to further give the consent of the government in which the Constitution was based upon.
Another way that the Constitution could be more bring clarity to it in more specific ways is to, if it was amended, I see my time is up.
Finish your sentence, please. Finish your thought.
Pertaining to the First Amendment rights and freedom of speech, or dealing with citizens, the case where
Citizens United.
Citizens United, recognizing the ability to contribute money to political parties or candidates is actually a fundamental right of freedom of speech to better express your views in the political process.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, I thought you guys did a very good job. It was clear you guys worked really hard to be here, and congratulations. I thought you had some interesting points to make in your opening statement. I heard a couple of things in it I hadn't heard from other teams, and by this late in the day, it's not common. And that's why I pressed you on the rule of law question. But I would have liked to see a little bit more engagement with that idea. I would have liked to see a little bit more what you had to say about rule of law and its importance in perpetuating the Constitution. And I did think that in some of your answers, you did veer a little bit away from the topic of the question itself, sometimes in order to showcase what was obviously some research that you had done, but sometimes it was a little bit difficult figuring out what the relevance was to the question. So perhaps it was just a matter of you were not articulating how that is relevant to the question. But that would be something that I think would improve your presentation quite a bit. But you guys did a great job, and I'm really glad that you came.
I thought you did a great job. It was very clear to me that you've done a lot of research, spent a lot of time preparing. As a trial attorney, I know what it's like. You're there, you're prepared very carefully. You want to stick to the points that you've prepared to argue. And so I get that we probably asked you some questions that you were like, that's not really what we prepared for. So sometimes it's hard to go to the question that you're asked. And I had a judge once at a panel discussion, and we asked, well, what if it, Judge, what if we're asked something by the judge that's not really what we've prepared or not the point that we want to make? And the judge gave some sage advice, which was answer the question that you're asked. Don't give the answer that you want to give. And so that's sort of, I think, what we're trying to say is just make sure that when we're asking a question that you kind of stay on point to the question that we're asked. Because you guys are really well prepared. You did a really great job. It's very clear that you spent a lot of time thinking about it. But just staying on topic with the question that was asked will kind of help you do a better job this time.
I agree. It was really good, and a good opening. The beginning with the Tocqueville quote, I thought that really was a nice way to begin, lay the foundation for your argument. I thought you did a nice job of answering most of the questions, and they were thoughtful answers. I thought in particular the answers at the end about what you would do with the Constitution. I mean, those were great answers, very thoughtful. It just showed to me you thought about it. You were able to, with no sweat, really reference Amendment 17, just as the corollary. That's very impressive. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Very nice job. We have 20 minutes and then we could get here for bus. Folks, like I'm gonna do.
You need the room now?
No, but as soon as you guys
With my family,